Welcome to the Healing Pathway, Part 1, Introduction. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I would like first to thank you for joining me today on this first presentation of a series of presentations about a subject that is very close to my heart, and that is the subject of how it is that we as human beings actually heal from an emotional wound. You see, we all have losses in our lives. And if we're lucky enough to avoid losses or work hard enough to avoid losses in most of our life, eventually we will face old age. We have to deal with the issue of existence versus non-existence. And so we, as human beings, as part of our condition, that we have losses. So I want to talk about how we heal from those losses. And this has been a lifelong issue for me, a lifelong search for me. And so I began and have spent my entire career being a psychotherapist and being involved in the psychiatric field in other ways, such as managing programs for those who have been seriously wounded in their emotional lives. So that's what we're going to do. I'm going today to introduce that series. That will be actually today and next time I present. It takes a little while to introduce the series because it's very different. I have never heard anybody put together a set of presentations like this before that has the same qualities to it or the same structure. And so, not to say that it's better than what anybody else has done or anything like that. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying it's new. And it's something that is the result of over 45 years now of my life of study and research and openness about my experience, looking all over the world for answers to a question. And that question is, what is it that happens between one human being who comes asking for help and another human being who offers that help? What is it that happens in that relationship when healing actually takes place? Now, you want to know about what happens when it doesn't work also, because there are certain things that we as therapists should not do with certain clients. And I'm not talking about just ethical boundaries. I'm talking about there's certain techniques and activities that certain clients would be better not doing. So anyway, today what I want to talk about is a little bit of that journey. And please forgive me if that is a little self-indulgent. But I need to tell you where I have been. Now, the reason for that is very plain, simple. And that is that if you're going to go on a healing journey with somebody else, you have a right to know what kind of a healing journey they have been on. So if you're going to see a therapist or a counselor, take the time at the beginning and ask them what has their healing journey been. And they should be open enough to tell you that. And there are many young therapists and counselors who may not have had much of a journey yet. That does not disqualify them, okay? They also, if they're on a path in their own lives. That's the most important thing. So I'm going to tell you about my path. And again, I hope it's not too self-indulgent, but I want to tell you where I have been and how this pathway has unfolded for me. Now, along the way today, I'm also going to be beginning to give you some ideas about how it is that you might heal. And toward the end, we'll take a look at the healing pathway itself, because it is a pathway. It does have steps. The steps have labels, names, and they have activities associated with them, and they lead to a goal. And I'm also going to introduce to you the healing practices. Now, the healing practices really began for me in the year 1972. That'll give you an idea of how old I am, and how long I've been doing this. 1972 was my first year of practice, and in your first year of practice, you get supervised, which is a good thing. And my supervision was really good. And the other thing you need to do is you need to check with your clients and ask them, how am I doing with you, right? Am I helping you? And the feedback I would get both from my supervisor and from my clients was this. It was, Rich, when I come to see you, I feel better. Okay? Now, that's a wonderful thing. Feeling better is good, right? It's a good thing. And so I'll take a little aside here and just tell you, if you're doing something now that helps you to feel better, don't stop, right? So if you're going to see a counselor or a therapist who is making you feel better, and you feel like you're making progress around looking at yourself deeper and those kind of things, keep going. Or if you're going to a psychiatrist who's prescribing some medication for you to reduce your depression or anxiety, don't stop. I'm not here to tell anybody to change the kind of treatment that they're currently receiving. Some people even think of what I have to offer, what I'm offering you, is an addition to what they are currently doing. And that's fine with me. All right? If you use what I have to offer as an addition to or supplement to, that's a good thing. I would appreciate that. Now, so people were feeling better, but then I noticed something. In far too many cases, the gains that people made washed out. They either came back, or I heard in some way that things were not going well. Right? Things were not going well. Sometimes they even reverted to behaviors that were self-destructive or got them into trouble in one way or another. So then I was in a crisis. Had I, in fact, gotten into a field where I couldn't really help people? Had I chosen the wrong field? Because I had made a decision early on that what I wanted to do was help people. And so I started to look around. I asked questions of people that I worked with, and everybody thought things were okay, that I was doing a good job. So then I thought, well, there must be more to it. I looked at my training. I looked at other offerings in the field of psychotherapy. And then it occurred to me, my first discovery during that year was that feeling better is not healing And what people were really looking for was healing. Not just feeling better for a little while. Healing. Now, healing is dramatically different than feeling better. Healing involves transformation. Change, form, the structure of who you are now. Healing involves the change of who you are. You don't emerge from the end of a healing process the same person you were when you went in. You don't. You change. You become a different person. And you don't need to be afraid of that, right? I mean, the person that will emerge on the other side is the person that you were always meant to be. A loving person. A loved person. You see, people will seek you out. They will look for you. Okay? A joyful person. And a person who is in love with life in a way that you never thought possible. Now, some people consider it to be unprofessional of me to offer something like that as a result of, some things that I have to say. Well, I'm here to tell you that it is possible. There is hope for that. And it is very important that you understand that and accept that. So that was my first discovery, that feeling better is not healing. And healing is what people were really searching for, that change. Now, when I say you are going to be a changed person, that means that you can't be the kind of person that you maybe think you want to be, right? So you can't be like the guy up the street who you think has it all together and you've always emulated. You can't be that way. You can't be like the president of your company. You can't be like your mother or father even. No, you are meant to be a very special person. You are meant to be your own person. The person you were always meant to be. That's the end result of the healing pathway. So, Carl Jung, who I will talk about occasionally throughout the series, used to say it this way. He used the symbolism of gold. And gold is used all through fairy stories and myths and really all over the world. It's an archetype for beauty and wholeness and wealth and strength. It's just a universal archetype. But he indicated, Carl Jung said, there's gold in us. There's gold in our personalities. But just like you only get gold if you smelt it, if you burn away all of the dross, and that's when you get pure gold. That burning away in us is called suffering. That's what suffering is. It's burning away everything that is not us. And so the gold in us can emerge. And that's what we're going to talk about when we talk about the healing pathway. We're going to talk about why we suffer, what it means that we suffer, how suffering comes to an end, And then that brings me to my next discovery. And the next discovery was to change my life. And that discovery was that healing always, always involves the spiritual. You can't heal without the spiritual present in your life, without the spiritual being a part of your healing process. It just won't happen. So now, getting back to my story a little bit, I was started on a different path. And I started to look all over the world for spiritual healing practices. I have tried to stay very true to my original goal, to find out what works when people are trying to heal emotionally. I've tried to stay very true to that. But now I was looking all over. And I'll talk about that more as we go through. I don't want to spend too much more time today talking about that, but just to give you a list, I looked into Eugene Gendlin's work and focusing. I became one of the first focusing trainers, and you won't know what that means probably, but it was very important for me because it taught me the essence of the body in this emotional healing work. You see, emotions live in the body. We don't think our emotions. All right? We can have a thought that triggers an emotion, but the actual emotion is experienced in the body. And then I began to look into the work of Carl Jung, and I spent a solid 10 years of my life steeped in the work of Jung and the people who followed him, the neo-Jungians' work, also very important. And I made a lot of discoveries along that pathway. Jung, for the first time, showed me that there were answers to how it is that we heal. And he also re-emphasized the point that the only way we ever heal is through the spiritual. That's historical for us. I went through a 7.5-year Jungian analysis with a Zurich-trained analyst. And that's a lot of dream work, a lot of work with symbols and archetypes, and I'll explain an archetype later. For now, just consider it a symbol on steroids. Okay. You're not supposed to say that, I don't think, nowadays, the steroid stuff. Anyway, then I all the way through, I have been very interested in stories, mythology. Native American stories have fascinated me, and I'll talk about that at another time also. And then I also started then to look into Buddhism and became immersed in Buddhist studies. And I studied Tibetan and Zen and Vietnamese Buddhism. And again, extremely powerful. Began meditation practice. Still do that. Have been doing that. And at one point, my meditation changed. Just happened. And I'll tell you about that. That was very exciting. Still is. And then I began to study Taoism and the I Ching and Tao Te Ching. Beautiful imagery. Fantastic. beauty in those images from the Tao, and great contribution in terms of our understanding of the opposites. And then about 20 years ago, maybe a little more, I started to read the Christian theologians. I thought I might as well involve that in my look. And I studied and studied and studied, and what I found was that the Christian theologians, even though they said things a bit different sometimes, began to weave a tapestry in my mind, a single, unified, beautiful approach, and that was based on the real Jesus himself. And that fascinates me to this day. And what Jesus really did was almost all focused on emotional healing. So much has been misinterpreted, turned into moralistic and punitive, even paternalistic. Jesus wasn't about that. If you read his actual words, he was about healing, loving other people. And then the most recent thing, and I'll stop there then, has been the reading of the Christian mystics. Now, the Christian mystics were an interesting group of people. And still are. I think there still are Christian mystics now. But what the Christian mystics did was to take a different kind of look at how, well, let's say it this way. What the Christian mystics did was desire and receive a direct experience of Jesus. All right, so Julian of Norwich, take her for an example. When she was a little girl, she had 3 wishes, but one of them was that she would die and spend time with Jesus and then come back and tell people about it. That was her wish. Well, she happened to live during the time of the bubonic plague, and so actually 3 times she had the bubonic plague. The first 2 times she somehow recovered from it. The 3rd time she, I guess, in essence, died. She was given last rites, and everybody thought she was dead. In fact, she recovered from that, and then she reported that she had had these experiences with Jesus, which are just remarkable to read about. She called them her showings. Now, how do you know if something is real? Well, she walled herself in. The back wall of her cubicle was built against the church for the rest of her life, and had an open window where she would talk with people, counsel people, in exchange for some food and some writing materials, so she could keep writing about the showings. All right, so that's a Christian mystic. And I'm going to talk a little bit next time about why the Christian mystics, in my opinion, are so important, and why we really should be looking at them more now and trying to have some of those same experiences ourselves now. And of course, again, true to form, it has to do with healing. It has to do with healing. So now let's take a few minutes more, and I want to show you a diagram, a schematic of the healing pathway, and then a list of the healing practices. Because as I looked all over, I discovered healing practices from all over. And I also contributed a few of my own that I found along the way. And I want to show you just a list of those so that you'll have an idea now by looking at the healing pathway, because we're going to go through that throughout the series, and the healing practices, because I'll talk about each one of them in the series. So that'll give you a clearer idea of what it is that I would like to share with you. Okay, so here is a quick look at the healing pathway. You'll notice that it is a process, read top to bottom. The first part of the process, up until the point of suffering, is a descent. And then beginning with emptiness and the wisdom of God, there is an ascent. And so the process involves movement, upward and downward. Now let's look at the healing practices for a moment. Again, you'll notice that there are 17 of them, and these 17 practices have been based on research into many areas of healing practice throughout the world. And as I said, I've contributed a few of my own. Okay, so thank you for taking a quick look at the healing pathway and the healing practices that I'll be discussing in this series. I'm sure that look was much too brief, but we will be going through each of the steps on the healing pathway, and I'll be describing to you briefly what each of the healing practices is. I also will be suggesting different readings if you are particularly interested in one of the healing practices, or if you're struggling on one of the steps of the healing pathway. As I mentioned earlier, I have written a book. It is called The Healing Pathway, and it is available on my website, which will be posted here at the end. There also is a journal that will lead you through, in a closer way, the different steps for most of the healing practices. And then there's a package that also includes just a note book for you to carry with you and write down things that occur to you, and dreams and symbols and things like that. And I've included all three in a package at a reduced price, so you can take a look at that. I will be mentioning things in the videos that are not in the book, and I'll be I have written about things in the book that I won't be talking about in the videos. So I really suggest, if you're seriously going to walk this path with me over this series, that you go ahead and get these resources. My website, again, will be listed at the end. It's pretty simple. It's Rich Hanhardt, LLC.net. So that's the website. And just a final word now. I want to talk to you about the structure of your psyche. And this will be very brief, but I want to show you something and give you a first healing practice to look at today. Okay, let's look first at this diagram, this simple diagram of how it is that we actually take care of ourselves as human beings. Because one of the things that I really want to begin with is the message of how important it is for you to learn to take care of yourself. And often when we have emotional struggles, the first thing that we stop doing is caring for our inner world. So the blue circle here represents our psyche or soul. Now the Greeks used the word psyche for two purposes. One was to describe the soul, but it was also their word for butterfly. And this is a beautiful, beautiful symbolic image because the butterfly emerges and becomes something very beautiful. And so the Greeks knew what they were doing when they named the soul psyche. So the blue circle represents that part of your world that you don't share with other people, your inner world. Now the very small circle represents tenderness, the part of you that's very tender emotionally. Maybe there's great suffering there or sadness. Maybe there's pain about having been wounded, injured in life. But you keep that buried most deeply, especially when you can't deal with it, when it can't come to the surface because it hurts too much. But notice there's also the yellow circle. And the yellow circle is what we most commonly lose when we are struggling with emotional problems. And that is the ability to become very gentle with ourselves. Gentleness is an action. It is something that we do in order to take care of ourselves. And so what we're going to learn along the way are some ways in which we can be gentle with ourselves. That's my first goal for you and for me to share with you. Thanks for listening today, and I will be back shortly with the second presentation.